Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre, and today we have an extraordinary special program coming to us from Berkeley, California, with independent scientist Moret and military historian Moret Battis. Welcome, Loren and Lauren.
Thank you.
Hello, Alfred. How are you?
Welcome, Lawrence. Good to see you again. Well, today's program is extraordinarily wide and deep in scope, because it covers a whole range of events and focuses in on many events, including the tragic downing of the Russian Metrojet over the Sinai desert with the great loss of life. And we're going to discover many evidence-based truths which fly in the face of the current reality being projected by the mainstream media and the matrix powers. But if I were to summarize it, and please both of you correct me, in a single headline, it would be as follows. Moret and Battis. U.S. directed energy weapons downed Russian Metrojet over Sinai. Putin knows, agrees to, quote, ISIS bomb airplane, end of quote, disinfo, to create anti-ISIS coalition. So that headline tries to incorporate all of the complex 3- and 4-dimensional chess which is going on here. And with that, I know that we have a cram-packed agenda in this interview, so I'm really going to turn it over to you. And I know that we'll be starting with some background on the Syria war, Loren.
Yes.
And Lawrence.
Yes. So what we're addressing today are the geopolitics of Eurasia. And, of course, this affects the whole world. At this point in history, we're in a tremendous transition, a very rapid one, from the Western-based economy, and that's pinned on the petrodollar, to a Silk Road economy. And so hopefully we're changing from a predatory economic system which has to destroy in order to loot and steal other people's wealth and lands and so forth at great advantage for the superpowers, especially the United States, and at tremendous cost to weaker nations. And this has been going on for a long time. The United States has been involved in a war every year, every day, every month, every week, every second since 1776, when we became a country. This is our economy. This is what it's based on. And I should say it's of the European tradition as well. Now, Asia and other parts of Eurasia, east of Europe and Central Europe, have based their economies for thousands of years on the Silk Road. And all people populating Eurasia, the Eurasian continent, probably the biggest one in the world, all those people came from Central Asia. And these are the Mongols, the Scythians, the Sogdians, the Iranians, Indo-European Aryans, many peoples, very advanced, very clever, and of course the Iranians, as Persians in the region of Persia, which we now call Iran, they established the First World Empire. And I'd like to point out from my research that they still rule the world. Those same ancient bloodlines, Zoroastrian Mithra worshippers, and it's a tremendous shock to me. But when I talk about it to other people and present this new evidence about the origin of Eurasians, people say, well, that really makes sense, better sense than anything else that we've been taught. And so, actually, the Eurasians, including Western Europe and also the Americans, the diaspora all over the world, have the benefit of that ancient knowledge that the Eurasians, that the Central Asians accumulated over time. And so now we have a new world leader, which is based in Russia. China will be part of it also. But I believe that the leadership that we're seeing, that has been demonstrated by President Putin from the time he first became president about 15 years ago, that he's worked very, very hard to improve the infrastructure of Russia. He's done many things despite what you read in the Western media. He's really improved people's lives, repaired and improved the infrastructure. And I can say that what he's demonstrated in Syria is a very, very measured response, tempered with wisdom, with his own Central Asian corporate knowledge going back thousands of years, and his degree in international law, as well as the discipline and strategy that one learns from being a master in the martial arts. So all of these things have come together from a very complex pattern of many ideas and practices and so forth. And I think it's a tremendous hope for the world, for all people in the world, because he's creating a Silk Road economy where everybody gains something. It's not about looting or destroying or stealing or scorching the earth. It's about creating wealth through peaceful trading. Now, the Silk Road was a way of traveling across Eurasia from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And there is a climatic belt that goes from Portugal all the way across Eurasia to the Pacific Ocean in China. And it's called the steppe. And it's a grasslands like the prairies in the United States, and it's where the horses originated, where wheeled vehicles. They called them chariots, but they were big wooden wagons that they carried their yurts on, their portable houses, and the Indo-Europeans took those ideas as the Hittites, and they went and introduced the horse and chariots to the Mediterranean. And almost many of the words and the terms and everything that are military today in Western culture, many of those words originate in Central Asian languages. So the nomadic equestrian warriors and their strategies and their wars and their techniques, all of it, is still in play. And I can say that Putin's very good at flipping things on the opposition, which is the best way to win wars, and that he has flipped the hybrid war that the United States and Western countries thought would defeat everyone, and they would, this new world order would have their way. But what Putin did was flip it on them, and his hybrid war is quite different. And he's used the media, new weapon systems, old weapon systems, but most of all, it's his strategy. It's his war strategy that has avoided a third world war in this case, which the Western countries were desperate to get started because their economies are based on it. And he has rescued Syria, and he's destroying the tool of the British and the Americans, the Anglo-American Permanent War Crimes Racketeering Syndicate, called ISIS or ISIL or IS for the Islamic State, and earlier it was Al-Qaeda, all with British and American accents, funded and paid for by the British and the U.S., and all the oil that they could steal. So that's the setting of Syria now, and the war in Syria was started by President Sarkozy of France and continued by President Hollande of France. Those are the two main perpetrators behind it in Europe, and by the Arabian Gulf princes and sultans and emirs. And it's because they wanted to make more money. They wanted pipelines where they wanted them to give them advantages, and they were willing to destroy neighboring countries and cannibalize them, like Syria, in order to, just to satisfy their greed. So that's the setting. Now, let me just mention a couple of other things. What started this present episode of warfare was Putin's speech at the United Nations. I believe it was September 28th. Is that right, Alfred?
I'm not sure if it was on the 28th or it was thereabouts.
I think the bombing started on the 29th, which was the day after.
Yes, it was the day after his speech. And so what Putin did was he went to the UN on September 28th, and he drew his line in the sand. And the message was, we're not going along with this nonsense anymore. This total destruction of country by the U.S., by the Jesuits, by, in the background, and by U.S. allies. And the military, U.S. military, is already across the whole southern part of the Sahara Desert in North Africa, starting to destroy all those countries systematically. And so Putin said, finally, it's my favorite quote from his speech at the UN. He said, finally, looking at the U.S., do you know what you are doing?
Do you know what it is that you have done?
Excuse
Perfect.
me. Yes.
It's just perfect.
Yes, it was perfect. And when his speech was over, that was that. He was, he's very, very respected. You just watch people's faces and body language anytime he's speaking. They know he's for real. And the next day, suddenly Russian bombers were all over Syria bombing ISIS infrastructure. And from that, there were allies. Suddenly Iran, Iraq, other countries came to join Russia and to help them. Hezbollah from Lebanon, China, and that was a big shock for Russia to have so many allies. It was kind of overwhelming, I think, for the U.S. But I can tell you what an American general just said very, very recently, last week. He said, this is 6 weeks after the UN speech, he said, this has happened because we have crossed the red line too many times with Russia. So, the Pentagon knows, the White House knows, the oligarchs know, Europe knows, everybody knows now.
They all do know. What the United States started out banking on was something called mission creep, which is their own method of operation. It's how things keep rolling into the next portion of the crisis as this wasteland gets created that they're creating out of the Middle East in order to redivide it. What Putin did was he turned around, he went in and he showed people what military efficiency looks like, which is something the Americans haven't been doing. They've been making excuses for a year. He got more work done in 10 days than they did that whole year, for real. And the other thing that he's doing, which is completely messed up the entire disinformation campaign for them, every time he goes out, he comes back, and the battlefield, the turret cameras, all of those things, that gets published right along with the statements about the mission. It's like, here it is, have a good look.
Yes, his openness has been very, very powerful. And it's built a lot of trust in a very short period of time. So much so that within 4 days or 5 days, well, on the day that he started bombing, 850,000 Syrians were on their way back to Syria. And there was a refugee crisis in the middle of all of this, and all these refugees, not just from Syria, they were economic refugees. They were young men who couldn't get work in 43 countries. They were part of the refugees. Probably only about 25% of the refugees that flooded into Europe were Syrians. The rest were refugees from other countries like Libya, other countries the U.S. has destroyed, and so people were just looking for some place to be safe and to not be living without electricity or just infrequent water or food shortages, things like that. Their countries were completely destroyed. So they flooded into Europe, and of course this was an American military plan outlined in a document written by the RAND Corporation.
Population demographics.
And the RAND document is on our website, lorenmoret.info. People should go and read that, and you'll see it's the blueprint for everything that's happening and everything that's going to happen militarily in the future if things go the way the American military wants it to go. But it's not going to, because Putin is a very powerful change agent. Now, what happened is, as the trust began to build, many diplomatic meetings with Putin in the Kremlin began to happen, and leaders of countries were going to him. I believe Iraq asked for help to clean out the terrorists, and Iran asked for help, even though it was participating in the war. And I believe other countries like Saudi Arabia asked for help, even though Saudi Arabia had started the culture of the ISIS, the world of ISIS, and also funded them. But now they've come back to Saudi Arabia, and they're a threat to the royal family and the stability of the government of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, these are the Wahhabists.
The Wahhabists,
who are
right.
all recruited.
And so now we see many more allies that Russia has. They've made up their own mind, and now Putin has demonstrated such excellent statesmanship that countries in Europe are voluntarily severing ties with the United States and turning to Russia as their hope for the future.
He's planning a multilateral world, and what he has established is a reputation for doing what it is that he says he's going to do. And there's over a decade of track record on this now. And nations of the world do notice that. And there's only so much time the United States can spend trying to isolate the nations of Europe while it's also bankrupting them before they do wake up and make up their minds where the pain is really coming from. What Putin's offering with this Silk Road is a multilateral trading cooperative where nobody is afforded the opportunity to actually go in with a larcenous intent. That part of things, it gets policed pretty closely these days with them.
I think that the most important thing for Putin, because he's mentioned it a number of times, and remember, he's a legal scholar. He has a degree in international law. I believe that his aim, his concern is about the sovereignty of nations and the New World Order, and what the United States has been dishing out to nations the result has been to steal their sovereignty from them, to make them vassal states and subject to whatever the U.S. wanted, or I should say the Anglo-American Permanent War Crimes Racketeering Syndicate. And the sovereignty of nations is very, very important to him. And that is one of the reasons he's in Syria. And the United States and states in Europe have called for President Bashar Assad's removal from office as the legitimate, democratically elected president of Syria. And these countries are insistent. It's sort of that sort of is winding down to a whine. A lot of countries have already accepted that Assad will not step down because they want him to, but that a democratic process would allow the people to choose and decide who they want as their leader. So this is a very, very exciting time. And just remember, the symbol, the pictogram, the kanji symbol in Chinese for disaster is also the symbol for opportunity. And in order to bring in the new, you have to break down the old.
Exactly. So we also covered in our last interview the apparent involvement of U.S. Senator John McCain in setting up a false flag, which would have involved, at least from a transcript, which appeared to be genuine, which would have involved, there were two parts to it. One, the downing of a U.S. plane by an apparent Russian weapon.
Weapon system, yes.
Conversely, the downing of a Russian plane by an apparent American weapon. And we had just released that news story, I think, when the next day or so, this tragedy with the Russian Metrojet airliner over Sinai occurred. So could you walk us through that and see if there's what the connection between that sort of, that particular transaction and what you now have found about the Russian airliner might be?
Wheels inside of wheels. More than one agency, more than one plan. What we saw was the McCain interview. Actually, it was the Saakashvili interview. That was where the eavesdropping occurred. What McCain did was he exerted his influence upon Saakashvili as his cutout so that he would have plausible deniability. But Saakashvili made it very, very clear that who he was answering back to in Washington was McCain. The following day, the areas that were being outlined by Saakashvili as where his people would be, where they would get together and meet in order to shoot down the Russian plane, all of those things, well, the Russians just bombed the hell out of them, just went all over them. And so that kind of brought that to a little bit of a screeching halt. But as I was saying, there's more than one wheel. There's more than one angle. This is a multi-vectored situation. And you've got more than one command working on the problem, as they call it, from their perspective.
Well, this was McCain's idea as a warmonger in Congress. And he sort of represents the extremely conservative Republicans who love wars because they make a lot of money on them. And so McCain and Congress and Obama's administration were very uncomfortable with the successes and the intensity and the frequency of the bombing and the targeting of ISIS in Syria. And as the successes of the bombing campaign by Russia is cover for the exhausted Syrian army, which has been fighting all on their own for 4.5 years, very outnumbered and undersupplied and everything, and morally destroyed. The Syrian army began to start winning, and that was so beautiful to see. It was so, it's their country. Why has the U.S. and all these other countries been all over Syria for 4.5 years, destroying everything? So even with President Assad, he looked so demoralized and so tragic about what had happened to his country. And so what happened is that all these successes began snowballing, and new allies began turning away from the United States and towards Russia. And that panicked the United States. It panicked Congress. It panicked the Beltway, where the military-industrial complex is sort of headquartered in the U.S., and it panicked the bankers. So what happened is that more and more people were having meetings and requesting meetings in the Kremlin with Putin as the successes in the Syria went up and up and up. And the meeting with, so what the U.S. did was they simply turned to the CIA in operations in the Ukraine. They destroyed that country in 1 year, right on Russia's doorstep. And the CIA in the Ukraine conspired with McCain, and he boasted that he had the approval of Congress, of the Senate, I mean. And so Saakashvili, who is a war criminal in Georgia and the former president of Georgia, he can't even leave the Ukraine because there's an Interpol arrest warrant out for him. But the CIA junta installed illegally a year and a half ago in the Ukraine and ousted the democratically elected government. Sorry, just a minute. The present president, or the head of the junta, is Russian mafia. He's President Poroshenko, and he's the one who brought Saakashvili into the Ukraine and made him governor of the Odessa Oblast, or province, and then all this pedophilia rings in America. He was selling them Ukrainian children. He still is. He was selling people's organs and selling children and people for organs. And
the way this happened is
trafficking.
He was also hired to set up the Ministry of Health, which gave them the access they needed to the records. Now, the first person who'd gone in and gotten his hands on this particular ministry was Kolomoisky. He spent a whole summer of this war, the past summer, parting bodies out of there. And then from there, that's when Saakashvili got the contract. And that's when they also got the contract for things like doing the vaccinations in the Ukraine. All of this is because the health minister of Georgia, who was the health minister of Georgia, is now the health minister of the Ukraine.
And what Poroshenko has done is to have meetings with the head of Microsoft.
Oh, that's Bill
Gates.
Yes, Bill Gates.
Yes.
And he has an agreement with Bill Gates now to bring his vaccines into Ukraine, and they're going to sterilize the entire population. Everyone.
So this has been connected with the whole depopulation agenda.
Yes.
In the Ukraine.
Yes.
All of it. The people in the Maidan, the color revolutions and things, they've all been inducted into the military and then sent out to the front line, essentially untrained, and most of them have been ground up or have wandered across the line and joined the militia or gotten into Russia.
They have run these mandatory recruiting campaigns all over the Ukraine to bring young men and even young women to the battlefield in eastern Ukraine on the border with Russia. And these are pro-Russian people. All of the Ukrainians are Russian anyway, bloodlines and genetically. And so they brought the young men, the future of the country, the military might that would protect Ukraine from aggressive countries, and they put them in these battlefields without any food. A lot of them didn't have any weapons, no military clothing. I've seen them in rubber shower slippers on the battlefield, and they were just ground up in the battles, and it was all planned in Kiev at the by the top levels of the government. They were destroying their own future, and also the reason would be to make sure there were no young men to be active in an army that would protect the people and remove the junta. So this is how criminals act. This is what the mafia and the oligarchs do. And just the worst example I can think of is the Ukraine. It's very, very, very corrupt now. But they're brilliant people. They have contributed tremendous music, science, all kinds of intellectual, powerful and beautiful contributions to humanity. And they now, in 1 year, they went from being the richest satellite state in the Soviet Union to even lower salaries and living standards than Ghana. And Ghana is almost at the bottom of the list of poor countries around the world. So,
right. So this was basically to destroy the Ukraine as a country.
As a country.
So that
went on a race to the bottom.
So that the New World Order could chop it up and take it over from...
To create a victim population living on valuable land. It's some of the best farmland in the world. It fed Europe and Russia and Eastern Europe and other countries. And it has 35% of the black soil in the world. And Monsanto wants it. So they have decided to create a victim population and then do a forced relocation with that population to somewhere else in the world, so they can take all that land, valuable farmland, and also Monsanto wants to grow GMO food to force onto the Europeans and other countries, Russia as well. Russia won't take it. And the GMO food is depopulation. It's a genocidal material. It's a genocidal agenda, and it's engineered for genocide.
This is part of why it is that Putin is so intent upon preserving sovereignty where and when he can. Sovereignty is an expression of the size that a society has been able to build itself to cooperatively and successfully. You have one called the Ukraine. We have another one called Syria. They're both difficult places. A lot of different nationalities, competing interests. There are some pressures and internecine struggles between the groups, but they were functioning cooperatively as a nation, and as an economic unit, they were able to lever themselves and be 20th century nations. They've been taken to third world status, and they're being balkanized. The reason why is because the varying different parts are much easier to control and manipulate if what you want are the resources. The resources aren't going anywhere. They're there. It's the people who are on them you need to control.
Or they're inconvenient a lot of times, so they either get genocided or they get forcibly relocated. Mm-hmm. Now, just to show you how deep into the Ukraine this McCain false flag went, is in this meeting with Saakashvili and a Georgian mercenary who was probably the leader of the maybe 300 Georgian mercenaries who were being sent to Syria on this secret mission to do this false flag. And the defense minister of Georgia was also involved in this meeting. And it turns out that the plan was to send these mercenaries, Georgian mercenaries, because they didn't trust the mercenaries in Syria to be loyal to them. So they thought, well, Saakashvili can bring some of his Georgians and they're going to be loyal to him or to Georgia or whatever. But they have less connection to the Middle East. They're Caucasus people. So then Avakov, the Minister of Interior Security and Intelligence, he was mentioned, and he was named the person by Saakashvili who had already had the Russian anti-aircraft weapon system smuggled into Syria ahead of time. And so we see officials in the Georgian government and in the Ukrainian government, as well as CIA and military people from the U.S. government, involved in McCain's crazy wild hair idea to have to shoot down an American plane in Syria with a Russian anti-aircraft system and blame it on the Russians. And then they were going into the Kurdish territory, and they were going to trick the Kurds with some excuse or some lie or something to shoot down a Russian plane and blame it on the Americans. And it was McCain's whole idea to start a third world war. The purpose was absolutely to start World War III.
I see. Now, I just want to take a kind of a side thing, but I think it's important to clarify it. We just had a record landslide victory by a very young, domestically progressive prime minister whose father was prime minister here, Pierre Trudeau, and his son, Justin Trudeau, I think he's 43 years old or so, just became prime minister, and his first step on the public arena was to scold Putin in public at the G20 and to tell him to, quote, back off of Ukraine, and to try to portray him as an aggressor in the Ukraine. How on heaven's name could Trudeau, who is a progressive domestically, do something like this? I mean, it seems insane. Could you do a brief comment on that? Because we in Canada here, who elected this guy, are like totally, aghast.
Well, he got elected because he's easy to manipulate and he's naive and inexperienced. And it's really the Americans who were as much behind his election as the Canadians. And the U.S. is very, very involved in Canadian affairs. You just go into any of the Indian villages, the Mohawks on either side of the Canadian-U.S. border, because their territory straddles that border, and I mean, they still own all of the Great Lakes. They never ceded those to the United States government. And they've had complaints about U.S. Border Patrol and Customs and everything operating on dirty tricks and harassment and murders and stuff of Mohawk Indians in Canada. So why is U.S. Customs, when you're coming out of Canada into the U.S. on the West Coast, why is U.S. Customs in Vancouver, British Columbia? That's how involved they are. We have underground bases for 20 miles into Canada, American military underground bases. So they're very integrated, and I would say that they wanted a young photo op couple with small children, like the new princes and they're the new kings of Europe and their young wives and small children. It's the family model for the people in that country. And so he's very nice looking. Everybody knew his father, and he's Jesuit trained. Pierre Trudeau was Jesuit trained. So he's the right military war, political geopolitics sort of guy. Or he's been trained to be that way. So he was a good choice to serve not only Canadian interests, but American interests too. And what did he do? He went out to meet Putin, and the first thing he did was spout the Washington, D.C. Obama administration mantra. So he obviously is not aware of world affairs. He has no idea. He doesn't have a clue. And so they just wind him up and put him on the stage, and he's their marionette or their puppet. But perhaps he'll grow and learn as he holds this office, and don't give up on people. He's still really young. He has to learn his lessons, but he really is awfully young, and with very little experience to be the prime minister of a large country like Canada, with the tremendous mineral wealth that Canada has.
Right. Sorry, I know that's not on point, and so let's get back to our agenda here.
Fine.
I just wanted to ask one question, something you might have observed. You're up in Canada. There was a pretty good-sized reaction to those comments and things, and the next thing I noticed happening was the Canadian jets were brought home from Iraq.
6 of them.
Am I wrong, or is that how that happened?
Well, no. He campaigned on a promise to bring those jets back.
Right.
So he's fulfilling his promise.
Mm-hmm.
However, he also campaigned on an anti-Putin plank, and when he went to the G20, he delivered this anti-Putin message, and he hadn't gotten the memo, because by the time that Obama and Putin met, Obama was all over Putin like a cheap suit.
Mm-hmm.
So, Trudeau is such a puppet and a lackey in a way in foreign affairs that he didn't even know that the lights had changed.
Okay.
Put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's how fast they're changing with Putin and this whole situation. It's like overnight. They're arch enemies, and all of a sudden they're schmoozing with each other, and they're having drinks together at all the big meetings, and they're buddies, and they're making deals.
It's a different G20 from the one in 2014.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't want to get us off track, but I did want to get us on record that I thought that the newly elected prime minister really has to get up to speed internationally, and as well the foreign minister of Canada who has to get up to speed, and their whole team is just woefully out of date and out of touch internationally, in my judgment.
Yes. Well, that's all planned. It's It is planned, and it's how some very powerful entities, especially England, wants it. So what happened is that the CIA and military were supposed to greet these Georgians when they arrived in Turkey, and then to take them over the border into Turkey. And in the meantime, this memo, not a memo, it was a transcript of this top secret meeting between Saakashvili and these other participants, that there was a transcript suddenly posted on Ukraine WikiLeaks, and Putin, of course, got wind of it, or the Russians did. They may have had the intelligence already.
They may have put it there.
And but what that did, that leaked transcript resulted in that very night of that conversation for finalizing the trip to Syria with these Georgians mercenaries. It resulted in, as Larry said, the bombing. Putin sent bombers to Syria and bombed the locations where these mercenaries were planning to carry out this false flag. And so that exposed it to the whole world, the transcript did. So that false flag was caught with its pants down, and it was destroyed overnight. But the very next day or the day after, the Russian Metrojet passenger plane flying from a coastal vacation city in Egypt over the Sinai. The flight route was over the Sinai back to St. Petersburg, Russia. It had a full plane of children and babies and adults and elderly people. And it was shot down over the Sinai. And there was a call from the Egyptian president, and especially Putin, not to jump to conclusions. There was disinformation. ISIS put out posters and claimed they'd shot it down, and they had a guy standing there with a man pad. And, well, you can't take down a plane that's 32,000 feet up in the air with a man pad. And so the U.S. panicked, and they quickly carried out what this backup plan was. They always have backup plans if the primary plan fails. And they shot down the Russian plane. Now, there was lots of disinformation. There always is. If you're following a disaster, to get everything you can the very first day, archive it, because you'll never see it again. And the disinformation media machine starts spewing out every kind of story and fantasy and speculation, and buries the story in the evidence. So what happened is, just a minute. What happened is that the black box flight data, that finally emerged, and it had all of the data on altitude changes, flight speed, ground speed, vertical motion. Everything is recorded in those black boxes. And they did find both of them. And finally, about last week, about 2 weeks after the crash, this data was released by, I think, Russia, and Larry graphed it, and he graphed the the altitude and the vertical speed of changes in altitude, and that indicated that it was not a ballistic projectile, in other words, a bullet or a rocket or a warhead that flies in a straight line, a kinetic energy penetrator, but that it was a non-ballistic weapon that was used. The effects are in the graph, and Larry will explain it.
Alfred, the last 22 seconds of the existence of Metrojet Flight 9268 are not normal. They are outside of physical boundaries. If the flight data that I got from Aviation Week, released by the Russians, is to be believed. The last 22 seconds, this thing makes vertical moves. I'm talking about getting on an elevator and going 3,000, 4,000 feet in 1 to 2 seconds.
6,000.
It goes up.
6,000.
It goes down. It is going all over the place. And if you turn around and you take a look at that against what is called vertical acceleration, which is how fast is it going up or how fast is it going down, the graphs don't even come close to matching up. You've got plateaus on many of the vertical rises, 3,000, 4,000 feet. You've got no vertical acceleration for the duration of time that you just moved that far? Really? And do you want to tell me that 22 seconds of this overt a range of motion is updrafts and downdrafts? Again, I'll say, oh, really? These are not normal events, and they are outside of the realm of normal physics from where I'm sitting. If this data is to be believed.
Yeah, Yeah, so that what you're saying is that looking at the objective data
Mm-hmm.
from what? From the GPS or from the black box?
All of this data came from the black box. When you say, did it come from the GPS? What we're doing is we're talking about one data stream, GPS. GPS altitude is one of the outputs that is recorded by the black box in this day and age, and the other is the altimeter output. Now, normally, when they're reporting something, they default to the altimeter side of the street. However, in the case of Metrojet 9268, the data between the GPS altimeter and the plane's standard altimeter,
cockpit altimeter,
diverged so much that they made a determination that the accurate data stream was the GPS stream, and they went with that.
Because it was coming from a satellite.
Now, this is a determination that was made by the Russians, and what I'm doing is the break point between where they decided they could no longer trust the cockpit, and when they went to lean entirely upon the GPS altimeter.
And what happens is that the instruments in the cockpit, like the altimeter, which measures the altitude, report to the black boxes. So the black boxes are the record, and the instruments are the altimeter, and the reporting source are the instruments. Now, so you have reports from the cockpit, and you have the reports from the satellite, which is independent of the airplane, and that's the GPS.
And
the geographic positioning system, and that also reports to the black boxes. So you have records in the black boxes, not only from the plane, but from satellites and the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what that shows, just to paraphrase you, and tell me if I'm being inaccurate or oversimplifying, is that it shows that the plane is almost, there's a giant that's like shaking it up and down very rapidly, 6,000 feet at a time. Like
what it was
or
doing,
it's at 3,000 feet at a time.
What it shows is that plane was moved, traveling 6,000 feet in a couple of seconds, up and down and up and down, at 8,000 miles an hour. That plane was not built to withstand 8,000 miles an hour speed. And
8,000 miles an hour. So it must have gone quantum.
It went quantum. This is Tesla technology, or something that is a new phenomenon. It's exotic science or an exotic weapon. It's an electromagnetic weapon, but a flash was reported by Interfax in Russia at the time the plane went down. And I know from the downing of the Columbia, the spaceship Columbia, the space shuttle, that a similar flash was actually photographed over San Francisco Bay, hitting the space shuttle as it was heading for Texas to land at, or to wherever it was going to land. Canaveral, Cape Canaveral in Florida. And so the tiles started flying off of the outside of the space shuttle over Arizona, and it just started coming back apart all the way until it crashed in, what state did it crash in? Arkansas?
It littered parts starting in Texas. It finished off over in Arkansas somewhere. It might have hit Georgia.
Yeah. So this is an exotic weapon. The Russians know exactly what happened. They knew when it happened, and they knew what did it. Now, what Putin decided, instead of presenting this information to the world, he said, be patient, we're doing the investigation. But in his speech at the G20, he said, well, we're almost ready to release that report. And he went home to the Kremlin, He immediately held a meeting in the Kremlin late at night. He must have had jet lag and tired and everything. But his important people were there, the Minister of Defense and the head of his administration and so forth. And they had a meeting, and he announced that the cause of the crash of the metro plane had been determined, and they determined it was a bomb inside the cabin. Now, they already knew a directed energy weapon had taken that plane down. But what they knew was that they would not get political juice out of that. And so they said a terrorist did it, and the bomb was inside the plane. And so the next morning is when the next phase of the war against ISIS started, much intensified, because Putin ordered the strategic bombers that are always kept in Russia to begin bombing in ISIS in Syria. And they doubled the number of bombing sorties, and they are bombing with cruise missiles.
Alfred, they were in close contact from the moment that this plane was down. Putin, all of his people, anytime he wasn't in public, they were in private. They've got means of communicating without being intercepted. What I saw when Putin got back to the Kremlin and sat down with them was something that had already been worked out. It was a set piece.
Yes.
They're all at the table. The Minister of Defense, or an Assistant Minister of Defense, tells him, yes, it was the terrorists. We've found traces of a bomb. Now, they've already announced they haven't found traces of a bomb. There's just so much time. And then they get around to announcing, yes, we have finally done it. We have found the traces of a bomb. And then Putin, it wasn't really bad acting. It was just a little too stiff. And the whole thing went on from there. It was a set piece. You had your moments of silence for the victims. This is appropriate. And then everything that they had made determination about, Putin sat down and just laid right out as if he was saying it to him for the first time. This was done for the camera. And this was a decision they made. What is politics?
And Putin invoked UN Article 51 that justified attacking the enemy because the Russians had been attacked by the downing of that plane. But let's go back to the G20, because we didn't talk about Putin's speech, and that's very, very important. And what happened in his speech is that, last year he went to the G20 and no one would meet with him, no side meetings, no one would talk to him. They laughed at him and spoofed him, especially the host, who was the Australian Prime Minister. And Obama was there and Cameron was there, and they were all smirking and making fun of Putin. And so Putin left a day early. He was fed up. And this year he was the keynote speaker. Look how the world can change so quickly. And when he got up to speak, I knew he had a left hook in his pocket. When I saw him walking down the hallway with his entourage, he was serious, but a lot of them had this knowing smile about this really fun thing that was about to happen to the enemy. And Putin got up, and what he said is, we have done an investigation from satellite sources, images, and planes. We have photographs on the ground documented of oil convoys going from Syria into Iraq, where this illicit oil that was the whole oil fields were taken over by ISIS, and they were shipping the oil into Iraq for refining and then selling it all over the world at $40 a barrel when the market price was about $80. And it's that money, $1.5 million a day for just one part of ISIS, and like $150 million a day for the whole enterprise, because there are different groups of militants in Syria, and they were all getting some of it to fund their war. So Putin showed all these satellite photos, and my God, the convoys of oil trucks were 5 kilometers long and at an altitude of 5 or 10,000 meters. The convoy went over the horizon. You couldn't even see the end of it. And when you see them parked in the desert, the satellite photos showed thousands and thousands of oil trucks, tankers, parked out in the desert at the infrastructure, the ISIS infrastructure in the oil fields. So this is how these mercenaries and the whole ISIS and Al Qaeda and IS and ISIL structures are funding their activities for the Anglo-American Permanent War Crimes Racketeering Syndicate. And on top of that, Putin stood up and said, now, I just want you to know that from our investigation and research, we've determined that 40 countries were involved. And some of them belong to the G20. And everybody kind of sat up.
And one of them is Turkey.
And one of them is Turkey. And he didn't name any others, but he did put them on the edge of their seats, hoping he would stop there. So the most amazing things happened. All of a sudden, Obama was friendly to him. All of a sudden, Juncker, Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the European Commission, was saying, well, I think that we might want to do something about
lifting the sanctions
against Russia. And all of a sudden, all these horrible enemies who'd done such horrible things to Syria and to Europe and to Russia, all this anti-Russian mantra in the media over and over again just started melting away. And all of a sudden, European countries, like Juncker said, well, you know, we're really thinking about these sanctions. They've cost us a lot more money in Europe than they've cost Russia. They hurt us. They didn't hurt Russia. Mm-hmm. So we're really interested in talking about this. And Juncker's standing there right next to Putin. They're buddies, you know, and it was just so funny. It was just so funny. So Putin walked out with a big smile. And I know he was very, very excited about going to that meeting this year, and everyone on his staff was really excited too. And Putin just said when this was all over, well, Obama is just a child.
Yeah, that was kind of the back chatter that he's reported to have said. Mm-hmm. As the big screen showed Obama talking to, you know, the scrum and to other leaders, that Obama really had no substance as a leader.
Well, let me tell you how little substance he has. While Putin was running the Russian air campaign to give cover to the Syrian army and their allies on the ground in fighting these terrorists that have destroyed that country. The United States and its allies were in Syria also without being invited. They're there illegally. Hezbollah, Iran, Iraq, all of the allies in Syria working with Russia were invited by the president of Syria to come with their militaries and help them deal with this impossible situation. So they were legally there, and Putin is a stickler about that, about crossing his I's and crossing his T's and dotting his I's while he's been in Syria. He's a legal eagle beagle, and he wants everything to be squeaky clean. So, the United States, no one really kind of knew what they were doing because they refused to have any communications or any sharing of responsibility or anything like that. And so finally, Lavrov, who is the foreign minister of Russia, kept saying in the media one day and the day after, "Gee, we wonder what America's doing here. Gee, we wonder what the United States military's doing while they're here in Syria." And not very long after that, it turns out that the U.S. military was bombing the civilian infrastructure, killing civilians, bombing their water supplies, bombing their power plants, bombing their villages and towns, instead of bombing ISIS. And even worse than that, in the mainstream media, they were taking pictures of bombing in Syria. It was the Russians bombing ISIS, and the Americans claimed that they were the ones bombing ISIS.
Mainstream media. It's Russian planes, Russian ordnance. So the American planes are killing them.
Yeah.
The American planes were bombing gopher holes in the south of Syria over by Jordan. They were bombing civilians and all of the other things that Loren was just talking to you about. What they were doing almost amounted to refereeing a free-for-all inside of Syria while the place got balkanized.
And what they were also doing, the Americans and their allies, they were giving cover to the terrorists. They were doing the air campaigns to cover the ISIS militants and mercenaries there. There are 200,000 of these ISIS, these jihadists all over the world. They're infiltrating countries all over the world. They're going to have a global mess if this doesn't stop. And the only person who can do it is Putin. I hope everyone in the world gives him support because, boy, he's the only one who stood up and said this has to be cleaned up and knew how to do it without getting in a world war. So, it's amazing. It's just amazing.
The amount of maneuvering and the amount of time that he had to waste getting the geopolitical conditions and his relationship to the world and public opinion and world opinion to such a place that he could actually do this, that the number of people that have died and the number of nations in the Middle East and North Africa that have been destroyed since Syria started is legend.
And it's just really amazing. It's quite amazing what he's done.
Right. Now, there's a whole chapter that I wonder if we could back off and kind of fit it in, and that's the quote, Paris terror false flag. And that occurred on Friday the 13th.
Right.
There's a whole, if you look at psychology, there's a special term for the fear associated with Friday the 13th. People have done analyses of the November cover of The Economist magazine, and 11/13/2015 is embedded in the artwork of the cover of The Economist magazine, which is your matrix controller magazine of choice. I mean, this thing is your classic false flag operation. So I wonder if, in the context of all of this, we have Friday the 13th false flag, which, as we speak today, I was speaking to my colleagues in Brussels, and they've upped the terror alert to the highest level from 3 to 4. There were scheduled student parties at the fair, and the students went there today, today being Saturday, November 21st, and there were police sharpshooters atop all of the buildings in Brussels. And supposedly the brother of one of the masterminds, or, I mean,
Patsies.
All of this is all false.
The Patsies.
All of this is all false. They're all Europeans. They're all, members of the traveling false flag troop.
Yes.
And they just pick these people that don't exist, and then they claim that they're either dead or they're hiding out in apartments in Brussels. And they got through so many passport checks getting from Paris to Brussels, because the police had them, but they let them go, and that shows you need more police. I mean, it's just a classic false flag.
It's an excuse to militarize and bring the boot heel down on citizens even more. But
so could you, and then just to finish, to set the stage, you have the Friday the 13th is set in the middle. You got the G20 coming up. You've got the Paris Summit coming up, on the Paris Climate Summit, where they're going to introduce more of the New World Order matrix legislation on November 30th. And then you've got in between that, you've got the APEC Summit in Manila to try and introduce the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There, Obama got up when he met Trudeau and said, and Trudeau's going to sign the TPP. He announced that Trudeau, his little, lapdog, was going to sign the TPP.
But what this goes back to, you said, what is the significance of this Friday the 13th? It's not just Friday the 13th. It was the 1000th anniversary of the death of the last leader of the Knights Templars from the Crusades, named Jacques de Molay. And so this reveals who is really behind all of this. It's a much bigger agenda than just increasing police powers in Europe. It's much bigger than that. It's a global New World Order agenda, and it goes all the way back to the Crusades and even before that. So,
because we have done program where your analysis showed that the Knights Templar morphed into the Jesuits, and the Vatican set up Friday the 13th as an ambush for the Templars. So we're dealing with multiple agendas, and we just had the first Jesuit Pope, which kind of unites the Templars and the Jesuits, come to the U.S., come to the UN, speak a couple of days before Putin to lay down the future world order in terms of the climate summit, which is now, going to be, and it was in the midst of that Putin came in and laid down the law. So could you walk us through the Paris false flag a bit, and the French Patriot Act and all of that, because all of this is occurring in the midst of this?
Well, suddenly, on Friday the 13th, there was this huge news blast of terrorist acts in Paris. And apparently gunmen came out and people wearing suicide bombs, and it was young men and young women. But, Alfred, they had perfect French accents.
Right.
And many of the Al-Qaeda and ISIS have perfect British accents, and sometimes Americans. So, who are they really? Yeah, sure.
And Israeli accents.
And Israeli,
yes.
and Israeli
Lest we
accents.
forget.
Yes. And Israel is taking 75% of the oil that's been looted in Syria, and they're the biggest benefactor. They're the biggest user of that illegal oil that's stolen. So they are supporting ISIS too.
And they're buying it at a depressed rate. And they're turning around and they're selling their own oil from the Mediterranean at premium rate.
Yeah.
And we have never had an ISIS attack in Israel. Gee, isn't that strange?
But we're going to have one real soon. Everybody be scared. Whatever you do, just remember.
They don't have American fast food in Israel, so ISIS wouldn't go there.
Oh, they do have American fast food in Israel. Yes, they do.
But basically, these were apparently the French police said that they had been monitoring these people for 10 years. They had finally decided that they were harmless, so they quit monitoring them. This horrible event happened. It created shock around the world, more terrorism to frighten citizens around the world. And frightened citizens start voting for powers, giving up powers they have, and giving them to the government to really trading their independence for protection. So it's a protection racket. And not only that, just a second. It just caused many, many changes, including perhaps oil prices going up too. So all kinds of destabilization is occurring. Then right after Paris, then there was there's been a big shooting in a hotel in Mali, in Africa. There are bombs going off in other countries. I opened up the Russian news a couple mornings ago, and there were fires and bombs and shootings just almost every story. It was just like you felt like this wall of death had just hit the whole world. But it's all part of an agenda to push the New World Order agenda forward and to take people's rights away, to destroy sovereignty of nations, to centralize the control, and to dispirit people, to destroy their even their will to live. It's so dangerous out there.
And where this has brought France to now is that they have passed the legislation that amounts to their French Patriot Act.
Yes.
Right.
And there were theater shootings. There was a theater. People were there. There's a photograph of that theater with dead bodies all over the floor, pools of blood everywhere. Then they had suicide. Oh, there were even dead people out in the alley outside of the theater. Then they were also went to this big sports stadium where there was a game going on, soccer or something. And I have a photo of President Hollande of France with Steinmeier from Germany. I've forgotten what his title is. But they were at this sports stadium when it happened. Now, the shooters and the suicide bombers did not get entry into that stadium, which is really interesting. Do you think it's because Hollande was in there?
Well, some of the analysis has shown that, in fact, no bombs went off, but what happens now is that very often at sporting events, they will broadcast crowd noise through the loudspeakers to make it seem like there's more excitement.
Yeah.
And they think that the bomb blasts were actually just broadcast. There were fake bomb blasts that were broadcast through the crowd noise.
Yes.
And that Hollande, like George W. Bush, was part of the false flag.
Yes.
And in fact, there's a photograph that I saw online today, side by side, of George W. Bush in the schoolhouse, Florida, being notified by an aide, and Hollande being notified by an aide. They were side by side, and their expressions were identical. So there's, and I'd like to say that with regard to that theater, we now have evidence that at least one of the persons was alive, was reported. She's a Mexican woman, and she was alive. She talked to her mother, and then the police picked her up, and she was killed in police custody, and then her body was dumped at the theater. All those bodies in that photograph were dumped there, and we have analysis showing that the police in Paris systematically went around and found witnesses. And if you were a witness, the second question they asked you is, where are you from? And if you were from designated countries, they would pick you up, kill you in custody, and then dump you in a theater. And that's why they had victims from a wide variety of countries, and that was the methodology.
Very
and
interesting.
we even have witnesses now who caught on to that, so they didn't give answers to the second question. So everybody knows now that the police were out as assassination squads.
Yes.
So this is an international scandal which is now being known. It's just that the mainstream media is not reporting it.
Two advantages to the French government from Hollande's point of view. The Patriot Act, Hollande's re-election. These are the two big things right now.
That's right. And then I'd like to mention that in Odessa, during the period of the Maidan demonstrations, the people were peacefully demonstrating, and all of a sudden, these sharpshooters started shooting at everybody. Nobody knew who they were. They were shooting the police. They were shooting the public. They were shooting everyone. It turns out later a lot of them were from Poland. They were mercenaries from Poland. And so I have a video in Odessa when the trade building was burning and hundreds of people were burned up in it. They went into the trade building to get away from the bullets flying. And all of a sudden, Molotov cocktails were flying through the windows into the trade building and trapped people, and they were burned alive. Well, there was a video clip someone put on the internet, and there were these guys running around in T-shirts with chemist on them, or I love chemistry, and they had rubber gloves on, and they were making Molotov cocktails. So this citizen with a camera walked up to one of them and said, "Oh, who are you and what are you doing?" And it was all on camera, and the guy said, "Oh, I'm an Israeli. I'm a dual American-Israeli." He said, "We're making Molotov cocktails." And they were the ones who threw them into the building. We have photos of big containers. They were using plastic pop bottles, soda water bottles, and and bottled water bottles. They'd just taken them out of garbage cans or something.
Beer
bottles, yeah,
things.
anything that had a screw cap. They made them into containers full of these Molotov cocktails around that area.
They were making them and then passing them out, and
Yes.
there were other people actually doing the throwing.
Right, exactly. Well, the reports that we've gotten back from Europe, specifically from Brussels, today, is that there's tremendous fear there in the mainstream population. That is, people who are not alternative and don't know that this is false flags. So apparently these programs, which are enforced by the mainstream media, which are carried out as military coordinated military operations by the police, by the government, by the army, are working.
When World War II ended, the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA, in Europe, said, well, we can't just leave Europe and turn it all over back to them. We need to leave behind army. And they set up NATO and left it. They set up Gladio, a secret leave-behind army that had caches of weapons and ammunition buried all over Europe. And they had these secret organizations that men belonged to. And I even stayed in Paolo Scampa as a professor in Italy. And I was invited to speak about depleted uranium a few years ago in Friuli, which is north of Venice, the province north of Venice. And so I wondered why I was staying with him 35 miles from the reggae festival, where they had peace activists from all over the world speaking in the daytime, and then they had bands at night. And I was not allowed to stay in the hotel with all the other guests. And so on the very last day that I was there, I walked into the living room. I was leaving pretty soon for the railroad station to come back to America. And Paulo introduced me to his uncle. And his uncle's sitting there looking at me, scrutinizing me, an older man. He said, oh, my uncle is the head. He's the chief of the Friuli police. And I went, oh my God, NATO followed me all the way to Friuli, and then they put me in the hands of Gladio while I was there. And so I know all about Gladio, and it's a very, very, very good film in, I think, 10 parts or something. It's about 3 hours, 2.5 or 3 hours. On the internet. Everyone should watch Gladio because it explains everything that's happening now. And Gladio is secretly under NATO. Now, this airplane downing of what is it?
9268.
Yeah.
Metrojet 9268.
9268 is related to the downing of MH17 in Ukraine in July of 2014, and to the downing of MH370 in Malaysia over the South China Sea in March of 2014. In March of 2014 was the day that the junta overthrew, or the CIA overthrew, the government of the Ukraine and installed their junta stooges. And in the summer, when MH17 went down, it was because the pro-Russian militia, the volunteers, were winning, and the U.S. interests weren't happy about that, so they shot down that plane. and the U.S. Navy was offshore doing an exercise called Sea Breeze. There were 300 U.S. Marines participating in that exercise, but they were on the ground, and some of them were on the battlefield, manning the communication posts for the Ukrainian army that shot the Buk missile that took down MH17. And what plane was flying just a few miles behind MH17 when it went down? Singapore Airlines. Singapore is the CIA MI6 headquarters and carved out of Malaysia and created just for the CIA and the MI6. It's their headquarters in Southeast Asia. So now we're getting to the pivot to Asia. And so MH370, the downing in the South China Sea, was done in Singapore airspace, so that Singapore had jurisdiction of the investigation. And this downing of MH17 in Ukraine is the other end, the other bookend of Obama's pivot to Asia. And the U.S. was involved in those shoot downs and the Russian downing in the Sinai. And, just a minute.
Right.
Wait, you're going to have to cut these out of the film. And, just a minute. Oh, God. These are the bookends of the pivot to Asia. And this is what Obama is intending to stop. He's going to stop this progression of lawlessness by these mercenaries.
Putin.
And
this is what Putin intends on stopping.
Yes. And so you can see that this Russian intervention in Syria to free Syria from all of this horrible war and looting and theft of everything and destruction of their archaeological treasures like Palmyra it's got to be shattering to Obama, because the pivot to Asia was his whole accomplishment as president, U.S. president.
Right.
I know what it was. Gladio. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of points. All of the analysis that I've seen suggests and reinforces that Gladio was intimately involved in the Paris Friday the 13th and is involved in this rolling false flag that they have rolling through Western Europe now to terrorize and to Patriot Act all of Western Europe.
If you think back to earlier times when the Iranian hostage crisis and things like that were going down, there were planes going down then too. This all originates with the Project Northridge, which came out of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of all the branches of the military in the United States in the time of Kennedy. And General Lemnitzer was the chief of staff. Colonel Lonsdale, who was involved with assassination teams in World War II in Japan, and Curtis LeMay, who was in charge of the firebombing of Japan in World War II. Those three guys are completely crazy, and they're really lunatics, and they were. Mm-hmm. And they set up this plan to shoot all these planes down and cause these false flags and blame other countries. That's where this is coming from. And when President Kennedy went to the Pentagon to have his very first meeting with the heads of his military, he sat there with his aide for 10 minutes, listening to them, first time he met them, and he turned to his aide and said, "This meeting's over for us, we're leaving." He got up and walked out of the meeting, and as they were walking down the hall of the Pentagon to leave the building, Kennedy turned to his aide and said, "These people are effing crazy. And he fired Lemnitzer, and he sent him to Europe to be the head of NATO. Now, what did Gladio do at that time and around that time, and all through the post-war period? If you remember Carlos the Jackal, the Red Brigade, the assassination of the
Aldo Moro.
president of Italy, Aldo Moro, the bombing in the nightclub in Germany, this was all Gladio, and Carlos the Jackal was finally assassinated, but he was actually working for the Israelis, the Mossad. And this, in this film, it says very, very clearly, it's the intelligence chief. I mean, this filmmaker interviewed the actual intelligence chiefs and parties who were participating in Gladio at that time. And this intelligence chief said, well, no terrorist organizations can exist without the support and funding of an intelligence agency. So anytime we see these terrorism events, it's our own government or the government next door or a joint project that they're carrying out. They work for government agencies.
It's a proxy means of applying force or changing public opinion.
It's to create a theater of tension, a constant theater of tension that keeps the citizens on the edge and persuades them to vote for things that give up their rights for protection. It's like I said, it's a protection racket.
Right. Now, let me just kind of roll out some hypotheticals and to get your feedback on it, because I've been puzzling now that we've shown through the objective evidence that it was a directed energy weapon that was responsible for shooting down Metrojet 9268. You have to ask, what was the game plan? In other words, why did the U.S. shoot down a Russian civilian aircraft, killing over 200 people? And what was their game plan? Where did they think that this was going to lead? Did they think that this was going to lead to World War III, to a direct confrontation with Russia? Did they think? No, wait. Let me set up the question, and then you can go on. Mm-hmm. Was this meant as a provocation to Putin? It was meant as a provocation by the Israeli Anglo-American axis to Putin, where we're going to shoot down one of your civilian airliners. Now what are you going to do? And if you're provoked, we're going to come at you, or whatever. And Putin then says, okay, let me step back. And in martial arts, he comes back and he says, oh, guess what? I'm going to throw a false flag card at you. Oh, that was an ISIS false flag. So now that gives me the permission to bomb ISIS. And guess what? You're going to have to bomb ISIS with me, and I'm going to show you up as not even doing your thing. So Putin is really the superior general, the superior martial artist, right?
Yes, he is.
So, yeah. Now, could you affirm and kind of walk us through that logic? Is that what happened, do you think?
I very sincerely do think that they made a determination that there was no advantage to starting to talk about the newer technologies. They also have these newer technologies. When you start throwing things like this around, it's over the line. And what you're doing is you're daring them to overreact. And at the same time, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get their own population's public opinion to turn against them. So what you have is you have dead Russians. Now, a serious miscalculation got made here. I think they forgot what Russians are. Because, my Lord God in heaven, you had nothing but dead Russians all around you in World War II. 15, 30 million, somewhere in there. And it didn't stop them. It only got them more and more and more pissed off.
And the Russians were rescuing Europe. They rescued Europe 4 times in the 20th century. 20 million Russians died in World War II to save Europe.
Right. And so this was just an arrogant miscalculation by the Americans, by the Israelis, and by the Brits?
It's even worse than that. In Asia, they have business plans that are 1 month, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 500 years. That's how they plan. That's how the Russians plan. The Americans, the Wall Street Americans, have their business plan is for 1 quarter. In other words, 3 months. And they can change at any time in that 3 months if they want to. They don't even have to carry through with their business plan for 3 months. They can change it. And so Americans are sort of used to instant gratification. They don't have a history that it's so short that they never needed to plan for long periods ahead. We're only less than 300 years old. And they just have a totally different culture that's the result of hybrid mixing. Mixing from all kinds of cultures over 250 or 300 years. So we don't have the same
long-term perspective.
We don't have the same corporate memory or the deep time experience, thousands of years, that Eurasians have. Mm-hmm. Central Asians have. And so they do stupid things. They're overconfident. American soldiers were called Pindosi by the Ukrainians. They made fun of them. Pindosi is the word for penguins. And you know how penguins walk back and forth, they kind of waddle? Well, it's because Americans have so much gear and bells and whistles, every soldier does, that he's so heavy and loaded down with his crap that he can hardly walk. And it's a volunteer militia fighting with their spirit, fighting for their wives and their families and their people and their land. They're the Cossacks. It's the Cossacks who picked up 50 old Kalashnikovs that were taped. The wooden stock was taped onto the barrel. They were so old, left over from World War II. And they didn't even have training. And, but they have that corporate memory, and they still speak their traditional ancient Cossack language. So they have that tribal culture still that has kept them alive through thousands of years of change. And they kept what worked for them, and they discarded what didn't work for them, and they incorporated new ideas and new genetic material to make them stronger and to give them hybrid vigor so they could compete. And they completely wiped out that army many times, and within about 2 months they had every time they trapped the Ukrainian soldiers were loaded up with all new kinds of American tanks and planes, and they shot all their planes down with shoulder rockets like in about 3 weeks. And so the militia, the volunteer militia, ended up with more equipment that they had taken from the Ukrainian army than the Ukrainian army had. And finally, the president and the prime minister had gone to so many countries with begging bowls asking for military equipment and money that they finally said, we're not giving you any more in the U.S. Then they went to the European Parliament and the European countries, and they said, no, we're not giving you any more. And finally, they ended up, Belarus gave them hundreds of old tanks that had been parked around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. When the disaster happened, they were all radioactive, and they were ratty and unrepaired and everything. And train loads of those radioactive tanks went to the battlefields for the Ukrainian soldiers, because the militia, the volunteer soldiers, pro-Russian, mostly miners, had the best equipment. They had all the new equipment, the new guns, everything, and they learned how to use it all. And finally, Putin had to stop that conflict because 14,000 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in 2 days by the militia. They were trapped in a cauldron, and the militia took all their equipment. They tried to get the Ukrainian military to leave. They said, please surrender, put down your arms, leave your gear here, and we will give you safe passage out of this cauldron. You're on our land. And we will take you to the battle line, the battlefront, and you can go home. And when so many of the Ukrainian soldiers walked across that line and joined the volunteer militia and started fighting with the pro-Russians.
They were also ambushing their own people who were trying to join the militia. There was more going on than just that. Poroshenko, every time his army got put into a new cauldron, there was a new pickle, a new anything, he would scream for a ceasefire. And
Yes.
they would go back and they'd start negotiating some more. Now, he'd go on local television the entire time that they're doing these peace negotiations, telling everybody and their cousin, oh, we're rearming, and that they would go out for the next round of it. This accomplished a couple of things, including killing his own population to get them out of the way, because he didn't want them coming back at him. And that was going on. Also, you had your Minsk agreements. Now, every time he had to give more concessions there, what he did was he turned around, he came back, and in his legislature, his Verkhovna Rada, he would reinterpret what it was that he had agreed to at Minsk. That would be legislated, and on the flip side of it, they'd start their next war. It finally got so bad. They finally lost so much gear. They finally lost so many people. They finally got themselves so bedraggled that the militia were starting to smell, all right, well, let's just go take Kiev and get this damn thing over with. Well, that was when they started the nuclear blackmail. You've got your Zaporizhzhia happening at the end of 2014.
The nuclear power plant was deliberately sabotaged by the Prime Minister, Yatsenyuk, and it created they had Chernobyl-level accidents there and releases that nuked Greece, but it nuked all of Europe and Scandinavia all over again. And all those people in Greece they're going to die. They're going to die with much shortened lifetimes. And it's all part of the IMF banking and all these scams to steal countries and displace people. And if they can't move them, they'll kill them.
They then lit the Chernobyl forest on fire twice.
It's still burning.
Which is redistribution of radionuclides. They turned around. They threw Soviet battlefield tactical nukes at Donetsk.
Right in the main city.
They were also given some of the new tactical neutron, the small bombs, the mini nukes. They lit some of those off, too.
And it was Secretary of State John Kerry who personally had the mini nukes flown to the Ukraine to a certain airport, and Poroshenko accepted them. and they detonated those right in the cities, in the war zone.
And this is why Putin had to have the whole thing grind to a halt. And he just kind of, in the background, made it stop for a little while. And apparently he also made it very clear he didn't want any more nukes going off.
And this is very relevant to what that American general said when he said, "Yeah, we've crossed the red line too many times with the Russians."
Mm-hmm.
With the Russians.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
and Putin did not want a nuclear war.
Right. Let's kind of steer back to talking about strategic bombing. Let's steer back to some of the strategic bombing that Putin has been doing from the Mediterranean, from the Caspian.
Yes.
In support of the effort to eradicate the I like to call it, the Israeli American British project known as ISIS.
Right.
from Syria. Could you talk about that?
Let's look back for a second to invoking Article 51 of the United Nations. What he's made clear there is that he is willing to wage unlimited war. That's the first thing, in his own self-defense. Yeah. The next thing is he announced that the strategic bombers are now flying. What this is he has stated out loud and for the record, none of our weapons are off the table now. Everything is on the table.
Except nuclear weapons.
No.
They haven't said they're off the table. They just haven't fired any yet. He has said that he will fire a nuclear weapon. He will sink a ship if he needs to sink a ship. He will sink a country if he needs to sink a country.
Yes.
He doesn't want to. That's what he has said.
But he said they're all on the table now.
Mm-hmm.
And
in other words, he is not ruling out.
And
that's right.
In much the same fashion that when MH17 was taken down, a new weapons demonstration was made of the laser weapons system. He's showing off their new cruise missiles, their new ECW, their electronic countermeasures warfare. He's showing off a lot of things that have just totally flabbergasted NATO. And the intelligent people over at the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, well, they've mentioned that these weapons are formidable. I do believe they have said that certain of them are unanswerable. And these are the other things he's doing, is he is actually wheeling out and giving a demo of some of these things now. Like, when they sent the helicopters down to Syria, they sent them down in transport planes. Nobody saw it.
Nobody knew
Nobody
that.
saw them go. Nothing.
And Russia has developed an entire new kind of warfare with helicopters. They've never been used like this. And so what Russia is doing is they had the fighter jets bombing ISIS, the infrastructure. They are not bombing anything civilian. They're not touching anything civilian. And he didn't want any of the allies in any way damaging anything in the civilian sector. Then he I keep blanking. Just a minute. Wait. Let me. It's because you're moving everything. It just takes a little bit to knock me off. He was doing made it very clear that they were doing very strategic airstrikes. Then he brought in the helicopters. And the jets go over and they drop bombs and shoot missiles and stuff. But the helicopters come in real low. And they're shooting phosphorus off of both sides of them. And the phosphorus is hotter than the airplane is. So that the anti-aircraft missiles shot from the ground go after the phosphorus instead of the helicopter. And then the helicopters come in and they shoot missiles, and then they tip their tails up and the noses down, and they start strafing with sort of Gatling guns and cannons. And so they're chasing people around, the rebels around, or not rebels, they're really terrorists, around on the ground and shooting them down. It's a rabbit hunt.
That's the tactical part that's occurring because of the effect. Their ratio of effective attack is off the charts. When they drop a bomb, it's very likely it is going to be effective where they put it. They're very accurate. Their smart bombs are very smart. Their cruise missiles, they were really eye-openers. And the whole thing of it is that they're making it impossible for these people to hide. Now, once you get them up onto the surface, you've got them running. Now all you have to do is start seeing them, identifying them, and then you send the tactical gear, the helicopters, the 34s, the Su-34s, the Su-25s, the Su-24s, the tactical aircraft, the tactical bombers, the helicopters to go mop up the individual people.
And it's all, the airstrikes are all based on intelligence from the ground that has identified definite terrorist factories. They're making their own ammunition. They're making weapons. They have factories to repair damaged arms and vehicles. So they went in and they used the cabini. Cabini is this electromagnetic weapon that knocks out all the electronics. So one morning they woke up, or it happened, when they were operating, and the Russians had turned on this electromagnetic weapon, and so it instantly drained all the batteries in every vehicle in this within 250-mile radius, and they put it across the whole shoreline that Syria has with the Mediterranean, so that no supply planes, Israel and the U.S. and other countries, were flying in supplies and dropping them with parachutes all over the mercenary and the terrorist areas. Now, the Russian air cover has bombed almost all of, I would say at least more than 80% of all of their supplies, their depots, their ammunition and weapons storage places, the factories to manufacture what they needed for war and to repair it. And what was left was the very deep underground tunnels and headquarters that the bombs can't reach. And so that's why Putin brought in these strategic bombers with cruise missiles, because they can drop them one after another and dig down. Each bomb makes a deeper and deeper hole if they drop them on top of each other. And now they're coming out of the ground and running in every direction, and they don't have ammunition or weapons to fight back. So they go and hide with relatives, or they try to get over the border into Turkey. But Putin said they have to be destroyed, all of them around the world, because you can't retrain them. They're already battle-hardened. They've been trained in all of this, and they're brainwashed.
Certain groups of them have been funneled out into Yemen already. Certain groups of them have been funneled through Turkey into the Ukraine already. Certain groups of them have funneled themselves and been funneled through Greece and up into Europe already.
That's right.
They have also gone out west. They're going up towards Kazakhstan and those things. East, excuse me.
Afghanistan. A lot of them went to Afghanistan. But the reason China is in Syria fighting with Russia is because the Chinese don't want these terrorists in Xinjiang province, where the Uyghur or the Chinese Muslim tribes are, and they are fighting China and the pipelines from China into Central Asia go through the Uyghur territories.
And Muslim Uyghurs are fighting with ISIL in Syria.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. Now let me ask you a question, because the kind of political issue du jour in North America, most notably in the U.S. and somewhat in Canada, is that we don't want any Syrian refugees because ISIS is going to hide among them, and we're going to, and that's a way to import the ISIS terrorists into North America, and we're going to import terrorism in North America. To what extent is there any reality in that argument?
The families, the Syrian families are what they are saying they won't allow in because they're terrorists. They're taking the young Syrian boys, as many as they can, that they can use in our military and training them. They're taking anyone who has any kind of military skills or applications. So as long as they're military and we can train them and use them as terrorists, then they can come in. But we don't want the families here.
I see. So this is just, it's utter political nonsense, and
Yes.
what they're continuing is just to feed the military-industrial complex, and the U.S. as basically continues what we call the USA Corporation as the military contractor of the City of London and the Vatican. Is that basically
Let me
what
give
it
you
is?
some numbers.
And we're taking it to bare metal.
Let me give you some numbers. Putin, the Russian military budget is $50 billion a year. Look what he's done with $50 billion a year. He's built relevant, new, and upgraded weapons that are suitable for the environment. They designed and built special corvettes. It's a kind of a ship for the Caspian Sea. And he also made a treaty with all of the countries that surround the Caspian Sea. They all made a treaty that no militaries can enter that area. There can't be any wars or any presence of any military at all. It's only for the residents of the Caspian Sea and the legitimate governments of the Caspian Sea. So he was launching cruise missiles from those corvettes into Syria and doing very serious damage to the ISIS infrastructure. Then, this is all after his midnight meeting with his staff, and he invoked the UN Resolution 51. And people woke up, and they'd been firing these, 30 or 40 cruise missiles from the Caspian, while their submarine offshore from Syria was firing cruise missiles into Syria.
From the
Mediterranean. And then he had all these strategic bombers. They always come out of Russia and fly back. They don't stay in Syria at all. It's too dangerous. And these are Soviet-era strategic bombers that are faster. They're so fast they can't even shoot them down, some of them. And they have very good strategies. They have other planes that protect them shooting that phosphorus when they're flying.
They carry ECW, the electronics countermeasures.
Also, so what Putin did was he told them to use, or the military decided to use this electronics. I didn't finish this story. So suddenly, all of the terrorists had no vehicles they could drive. The batteries were all dead. The ignitions were all junked up by the electronics. No cell phones worked. No radios or transmitters or receivers worked, so there was no communication. And it created complete pandemonium. So he's got all these systems that are very, very practical. They're very scientifically designed on very good principles, and they absolutely work. He spends $50 billion a year on that, and basically he put that military together pretty fast in the last 3 years. The designs had already been in the works. But in contrast, the U.S. military has a budget of over $500 billion a year, and they couldn't even hit one ISIS site in over a year of bombing and strafing and all these military campaigns, because they were really protecting ISIS, their assets, and they were bombing civilian infrastructure, or they were going to an empty part of the desert on the border with Jordan and just dumping their bombs there. So this has been very, very, very interesting to follow this, and you can't get this in the Western media. You have to read the Ukrainian media, the Russian media, the media over there. And they're much more revealing, they're much more honest about things, and I'm not saying they don't have propaganda too, of course they do, but you can certainly get a lot more information there, and a lot of what we're presenting today is from those sources.
Right. Now, I just want to go and cover one topic that we've actually covered somewhat during the program, but just to make sure, and that is that the subject of France changing sides. Do you think that has really occurred?
Yes.
I think that France has definitively gotten pissed off at the United States. France still is a member of NATO. France presently has a new relationship with Russia. Russia is letting them, quote, lead the attack on Syria now, unquote. The Russians didn't really want Syrian oil infrastructure bombed. It's one of the first things the French did bomb. So I have to ask myself, how much of this is really them going with the Russians? How much of this is self-serving? How much of this is a NATO appeasement? And how much of this is trying to form a new methodology for creating mission creep with the Russians, because they haven't been able to do it up until now. So we got to keep our eyes open for all of these things, and the reason why is for the same reason that he would false flag his own country in order to get reelected, for instance. All of these reasons. Right now, France is playing loose and fast, and we'll see where their real allegiances lie down the road.
And all of these factors are in play. It's very, very complex. You can't figure it out from one story or a month of studies. It's a lot of complexity, interacting forces, and a lot of change very rapidly. It turns out that the other perpetrator of the Syrian war are these Arabian Gulf sultans and princes and everything, and it's to make more money. I mean, they're just greedy. And for instance, Saudi Arabia is a very, very good example. The deputy crown prince of the new king, King Salman, is the one who started the war in Yemen. And he started the war in Yemen because he wants to be the next king. But he's not the legitimate heir to the throne. It's another cousin or uncle or something.
He's number two.
He's number two. But he wants to elbow that cousin out of the way, and he wants to be. Well, he's only 30 years old. He's the head of OPEC. He has all these important positions as the deputy crown prince, and he's also stepped in to do things his father's really not very well. So he's assuming some of his father's responsibilities. So what did he do? He went to Yemen. He said, oh, they have lots of oil and gas deposits that aren't developed. They're mineral wells. And he said, so I'll just start a war and we'll get all that free and add Yemen to Saudi Arabia. And he said, and then that will make me a hero in Saudi Arabia. People don't really like him. And so he went and started a war against the Houthis in Yemen. And the Houthis are the best fighters in Yemen. They're the most religiously devout and spiritually clean and most honest tribe. They're from the western side of Yemen on the Red Sea. And they've taken over 1/2 of Yemen back, including the capital. They ousted the government and they have their own people in. And they've sent the Yemen army to the border of Saudi Arabia. They want to go in and overthrow the king. So all of a sudden, the king of Saudi Arabia has his son making this mess on one border, and the king himself got involved with the king before him, funded ISIS and trained them and started this whole Wahhabi extreme religious fascists. They're Nazis, really. And then he said, okay, I'll fund you if you go to 3 countries away and don't come back. Well, they're coming back, and they're a big threat to the throne. But now the deputy crown prince has made an even bigger threat on the border of Saudi Arabia. And not only that, because of the very poor way that the Saudis have handled their oil economy, and because oil prices are so depressed, the Saudi Arabian government is going to be bankrupt in 1 year.
At the rate they're spending presently.
At the rate they're spending. Amazing. And they have no army. Their army's a bunch of flea-bitten, very poorly trained, I don't know what, soldiers. And so the king of Saudi Arabia has to hire mercenaries.
And the crown prince, who is not a brother, he's an older cousin or uncle, may just get fed up enough with this kid to cut his head off at the rate things are going.
Oh, he can end up he can end up assassinated, because he's already called a family council to deal with this problem king and his problem son.
Right. And I think that they deliberately mishandled the Hajj also.
I think they've done that for years now. No. I think the Bin Laden construction company's involved in the mishandling. You have a crane collapse almost every season.
That's the U.S. That's the U.S. undermining that royal family and the peace and stability in Saudi Arabia. They're destabilizing it.
Right. Okay, now we're coming to the end of our segment here, but I have one question, and it's this: there was a newspaper out of South America, I think today or yesterday, that said, "Oh, well, looking at world affairs, we can take our protocols and say that World War III has started or is starting." What do you think about that analysis?
I think if I had a nickel for every time that World War III having been started has been announced, I'd have more than a few nickels. Personally, I think World War III has already ended, but that's another story.
Okay, we'll have to cover that at some point.
But
that
would
be a very interesting program.
You can trumpet it all you want to. Has the level of the endless war changed? Has its complexion changed? Are we opening new fronts in the endless or the nameless war? Yes.
Well, let me tell you that, first of all, this has been a religious war for the last 115 years. And this war, the Yugoslavian war, this war in the Middle East, the war in Syria, the Bolshevik Revolution, World War I and World War II is all about killing Christians who refuse to submit to the Pope and the Vatican. And that's what this is about. They are killing so many Christians. These are ancient, old original Christians from the time of the Romans. And they're in groups all over Syria, and they've just been slaughtered like cattle in a feed yard. And the Serbian Eastern Orthodox Christians, a lot of them, these small groups in Syria, the Eastern Russian Orthodox Christians, they've all refused to submit to Rome, and the Bolsheviks were sent there to slaughter them. 100 million Russians died between World War I and World War II. And the diaspora of Eastern Orthodox Russian Christians that left during the Bolshevik Revolution, they're all over the world. Well, now people are saying, remember Putin spent a lot of time with Berlusconi, and he was introduced to the Pope. Putin is talking about, and people are talking about, he is the best leader in the world to protect Christians. But the agenda, even in Russia today, is to bring all the Christians under the Pope. So we have a very complex dynamic and a lot of interests intersecting, but Christianity and other religions that are not under the Pope will be brought under the Pope if there is this one world order. And I'm going to read the list of who these top families are, the Illuminati, who rule over the Jesuits. And the Jesuits are an army, a Christian. They're not Christians. They're atheists. They are part of the Vatican, but they are not religious. They're not priests. If you see them doing Mass like the Pope, it's a false Mass. They're not really priests. They're soldiers. And these families, the bloodline Roman families descended from the Roman emperors, the Vatican popes, and the Jesuits are the Illuminati. And these families are Farnese. Fidel Castro is a Farnese. His family built the Vatican, and his family built the Pentagon, and they own it, and they own everyone in it. Castro is not what he said he is. The Borgias and the Farneses together conquered the Americas, North, Central, and South America, and they intermarried with the Inca princesses. So these hybrid interests are intermarried, and these are new bloodlines. Well, they're not new now, but compared to how old their bloodlines are, they've merged. Colonna, Gaetani, Medici. The Medici family, or the Medici bloodline, took over the Bourbon bloodline. I'm from the Bourbon bloodline, and they murdered my uncle, my grandmother, and my uncle's lover. The Pamphili, Orsini, Aldobrandini. Aldobrandinis are Mesopotamian origins, and all means of. Dobre means devil. These are the satanic bloodlines that rule the world. Chigi. The Chigis run the Vatican Bank for the Jesuits. And Conti. And then there's a list of these bloodlines by their birth certificate last names, because they don't necessarily carry these as their last names from intermarriages and stuff. So those are the people running the world. That's the Club of Rome. That's the Club of Rome. They're the ones who said make AIDS. And the U.S. Congress, I have the bill in Congress with the testimony of the expert witnesses and so forth and so on. And Congress voted to fund the AIDS project, and they gave the U.S. Army money to develop AIDS at Fort Detrick.
Wow.
So do you see how it's all, and that takes you right back to the Pentagon. Well, they own the Pentagon.
Well, if Putin is involved in this overall vision or scheme to protect Christianity, and the Pope is at the apex of that, we'll have to do another program on that, because that seems to be at odds to his mission as political and military liberator.
But remember what Putin does. And Russians have traditionally been very, very secretive. They don't leak their secrets. If he had talked about what he was going to do, he never would have been able to do it. He doesn't do it. He does it the Central Asian nomadic warrior way, and that is if you know a tribe's going to kill your tribe, you kill that one first.
Right. Now let me ask you, is there any points or items that you had wanted to bring up that you haven't had the opportunity to bring up?
Well, I would just like to say that wars are always covers for genocides. And wars are always covers for land grabs and things like that. And these pitiful kings and queens and their armies and the oligarchs, the rich people and the nobles and everything cook these things up to cannibalize, to parasitize the public, the poorer people who are weaker and can't fight back. And so this whole flavor of robots and the Robota and genocide and all of this stuff, the particular flavor of it now that the U.S. is practicing comes out of Czechoslovakia and Eastern Europe. And so now these people in the U.S. who were born or have blood ties to those countries are the politicians. Hillary Rodham Clinton, I investigated her. I said, where did she come from? Well, Rodham is a shortened word, a last name for Rodinsky. Her family is from Rodinsky in Poland. They were Polish Jews. John Kerry, his family name was Cohen. He's from, his parents left Czechoslovakia in World War II, changed their name from Cohen to Kerry, converted to Catholicism, and they were flown right to Chicago, which is where all the high-level people come, the scientists, whatever they're bringing here, the Rockefellers are bringing here, they bring them to Chicago, straight to Chicago. And then they get dispersed around the U.S. and settled into whatever role they're supposed to play. So John Kerry's family own a lovely chateau in Normandy, and the reason is that they were court Jews or Hof Judah, and they advised the the Habsburg courts for centuries. And all of the accumulated wealth and art and everything, treasures, can never be removed from continental Europe. So when there are wars like World War II, his family bought a chateau in France, moved all the family treasures there, and then they emigrated to the United States. But he is... his interests and his loyalties are always to the powerful people. Madeleine Albright is not from a Hof Judah family, Czechoslovakian, but she is Czechoslovakian. and her father had been ambassador to Yugoslavia. And World War II happened, so Czechoslovakia was taken over by the Soviets, so he lost his position as ambassador and was bitter the rest of his life. So the U.S. government put her in as Secretary of State to do the negotiations on Yugoslavia. And she was safe because she carried her father's resentments. And so you look around and you investigate the backgrounds, and it takes you to the truth. It's real simple.
Wow. Well, before we leave, do you, both of you, would you like to say some words, each of you, to our viewing audience in these kind of, some people find them confusing, other people find them exhilarating, some people find them depressing times?
Well, yeah, but I think a lot of people have said over and over about our interviews is that they go, my God, she's educating us, or he's educating us. They can't believe it. They sit down to watch a video and they think they're going to be entertained.
Yeah.
And it's not entertainment. And then they're going, these women are going, oh, I've watched it 3 times or 5 times. Each time I get more out of it. Or one man, an astrophysicist in Hamburg, Germany, said, oh my God, my wife discovered your site and I hardly ever see her again. She goes in her room with her internet and she's looking at all your site all day and all night long. So that's good. It's good to empower people and to inform people, and that's what we're doing. We're doing a public service, Alfred, and I think that you and I have worked so well together for 15 years and covered, we started out talking about HARP, and then it turns into this, and then something else, and it's just been a big, long adventure. But what a great intellectual adventure.
Right. And if people want to go to your site, where should they go?
It's lorenmoret.info, and Larry made the website, and it's beautiful. It has art, it has archaeology, it has science, it has geopolitics, it has love, it has lifestyle, it has everything on it. So please go and start nibbling in our pasture. The grass is free.
Larry, would you like to offer some words for us and for our viewers?
Certainly. What we're all experiencing now is new. I mean, it is brand new. Nothing like what is occurring now has ever occurred before. That's the first thing to accept. Just know it. This hasn't ever happened before. It's never happened like this. What's occurring now is larger. But all of this is part and parcel of what has occurred geopolitically within what is known as humanity over what is known as deep time. And what we really are dealing with here is a continuity that has its own opinion of how everything is ultimately going to go. And what they do is they play various components. Game of Thrones. Various components. Nation states, nations, kingdoms, fiefdoms, suzerainities. It just depends on whatever the social divisions were in any given time. They play them off against each other for a couple of reasons. And one of the reasons is when you create tension, what happens is that the pace of technology accelerates. And that's one of the things they wanted to do. So they keep people studying war. And the more you study war, the more technology advances. It has no choice. That's how different civilizations and different societies gain upper hands. And they've gotten used to it. It is a condition of humanity now because it has been conditioned into humanity. It needs to be conditioned out. But what's occurring now is something else. It's called transhumanism. which goes back to transmanism, which is taking care of the herd, caring for, culling, moving,
breeding.
All of this. And this really is a way that they go about seeing these various different populations, demographics, societies, nations, these groups that they keep throwing into conflict with each other. And conflict's not difficult for them to make. They are holding the economic levers that they can throw in order to start creating them. These guys have been practicing this form of mayhem for a long time. When they get ready to roll up a civilization, they steal its intellect. They steal its libraries, its institutional knowledge. Then they put it to sleep. You're watching this happen in the United States and North America right now. The libraries, the general access to information is actually, quality information is actually diminishing at the same time that the information load or the stream available is multiplying exponentially. So what you have to do is you have to cut through all of the media, all of the new input, in order to start finding the things that are the facts, that have the valid contexts. All of those things becomes much more difficult for you to gain some grasp or some aspect of this continuity. The harder it is for a demographic or a population group to see it, the better it likes it. It keeps it local. It keeps them focused on local time, near time, close time, their internal histories. They aren't looking out, they're looking in. They aren't looking back. All of this has been done, and it is a part of conditioning. It's a part of education. It's a part of how the information stream is handled. All of these are things we're going to have to go back and examine carefully. We're going to have to make up our minds how, as civilizations, do we really want to live. And in America, we're coming down to a real crunch time now. There's very, very little time left for an American population to make up its mind that it doesn't want to be put to sleep. It doesn't want to see a nation stripped to bare metal. It doesn't want to be turned into nothing but an arms manufacturer, merchant, and a creator of mercenaries, which is where they're taking this nation to right now. The educational system is being flipped over, and it's being now marketed overseas, out of state, to whoever the highest bidder is, the people who will bring the most money, which normally are the foreign students. What's happening when they're here is they're being propagandized, they're being conditioned in a new fashion, and they're being sent back to their nations in order to start whole cycles of conflict and tension in those areas. One more time for the record. We need to take a look over our shoulders. Samuel Clemens Mark Twain said it quite elegantly. History does not repeat itself. It echoes. This isn't a diminishing echo. The echo is getting louder with every time around. That's the advance of technology. These people have thrown an accelerated entropy switch. That is what humanity is now working against. This is where we are. Accept it. Don't let it overwhelm you. Now, what you could do is you can start looking around, seeing who's doing what, and when enough of us start saying out loud, yeah, well, what you're doing, that's just plain unconstitutional, and oh, by the way, what's going on here, we can't be doing this anymore. When enough of the population gets to that point. So it's time for us to empower ourselves. It's time for us to really figure this one out, because the clock is running.
Very eloquent and very profound. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for giving me the time to say it.
Yeah, go ahead, Lorraine, please.
And what I would like to say is that what we're bringing is information that can empower people and free them from the fear, from being frightened. This is terrifying, what is happening. But we can't run away from the change. The change is rolling along. It's bigger than we are. So we need to make our spirituality strong and to be powered by our spiritual power. And it protects you from the dark energy. Stay away from universities. They're being turned into satanic training camps for creating students into ISIS-like operations. Stay away from them. Keep your children out of them. And the tuition is so expensive now, even for the state universities that should be free, that a student taking out student loans will never be able to pay that back. And the conditions are that if they don't, their parents have to. And if they don't, then the children that aren't even born yet of these students will have to pay back their parents' loans. Oh, wait. And in terms of health, we're in a nuclear war. We're in a chemical nuclear war. These chemtrails are full of pathogens. They're full of chemicals. They're full of radiation. And they're full of other strange things we don't even know. Nanoparticles that are antennas in your body that can change your DNA and your chromosomes. So be sure to filter your drinking water. Stay away from dairy products and unfiltered drinking water. Get a reverse osmosis water filter. That is the most efficient at removing radiation from the water. Buy your food at farmers markets where people grow it in real dirt. And they love their plants. They love their farming. Farming is very, very difficult, and the farmer takes on all the risk. The banks don't, the farmer does. They're growing that food for us. They're growing that food because they love being farmers. They love producing an income and being able to support their families at an honest job. They're getting up at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning to drive to the farmer's market to sell their products to us. And if you buy a head of lettuce at a farmer's market, it's fresh in the refrigerator for 2 or 3 weeks. If you buy it in a grocery store, it's bad in 3 days. So the quality and the nutrition is wonderful. Stay away from processed food. Spices and herbs are great sources of the trace elements and other, they have medicinal qualities that counteract radiation and chemicals. And find an herbal shop. Start learning about essential oils and herbs, because our bodies and our cells operate on electromagnetic frequencies. And when your cell or your organ is off frequency, that's what disease is. All you have to do is go out down to your herbal shop and say, gee, I have a bladder infection, or I have styes on my eyes, or I have acid reflux, or whatever. You'll pay $2 or $3 for a few little bags of herbs, go home and make tea out of it, and you're well the next morning. So there's so many ways to live on less, but to have a much fuller and richer life. And the most important thing is love. Loving our neighbors, loving our family, loving our teachers, loving the people who make our lives our lives. And stay away from people, stay away from scams and schemes where they take from you and give nothing back. That is the mantra of the New World Order. They take everything and they give nothing back. And what Putin said, so disappointed, maybe a couple of years ago, he said, Oh, I thought America was wonderful. I wanted to be liberal and leftist and to emulate the American model and everything. And he said, but you know, I did lots of things for the Clinton administration. They asked me to do lots of things for them. He said they never did a thing for me. And then other presidents. And slowly over time, his impression and his good impression and his awe of the American dream was eroded away. And finally, I think when this whole thing happened with the Ukraine, he didn't believe America was a good thing at all. And now we see he knows it isn't, and he took action in Syria, and he's doing the right thing for the right people in the right way and as little destruction as possible. So I think that there's a very, very good book that I'd like to recommend to people. It's called The Nameless War, and it's by a man named Ramsey. And we have the PDF on our website, lorenmoret.info, The Nameless War. And he was a member of the British Parliament in World War II. And he wrote that book to try to stop World War II. And he wrote it in the 30s. And they put him in prison. Or maybe 42 he wrote it. They put him in prison. He was in prison all through the war. They suppressed the book. And the day the war was over, they let him out of prison. He went back to his seat in Parliament and took it. And he explains in that book 1,000 years of this same war over and over and over again. It's the same war. It's the same templates for the war. It's more dying. It's more profiteering. It's more land grabbing. And it's all senseless, completely senseless. Benefits a few and harms, very badly harms a great number of people. And so when you see that, because I read that, I recognize going on around me, the little secret neighborhood groups that are forming. Well, they're aliens. They're people who weren't born in the United States, a lot of them. Or they're people who have no loyalty to the United States. And the Israelis are infamous for that. And so you start, you read that, and suddenly you understand what's happening all around you, and then it's not so frightening because it's been happening for 1,000 years and 1,000 years before that and 10,000 years before that. So just open your heart to this and open your mind and empower yourself, educate yourself, share it with people. Just start making real relationships based on real facts, and your life will change a lot. And suddenly, out of nowhere, the right people will just come and find you because you're doing the right thing. And they're right people, and they're looking for more people like them. But when you're lying and you're cheating or you're lying to yourself, which is the worst form of lying, those people won't come near you. And that is what everyone really wants. They want to be loved and they want to love. But you have to love yourself first. And you have to live in truth to be able to love yourself. And it's a great growing process. It's an adventure. Isn't it, Alfred?
It is.
Thank you, Larry.
Oh, thank you, my love.
And thank you so much.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both for your service and for all of the work that has gone in, not only to this program, but to our ongoing series, and for taking the time and effort to create this program today and the research to bring the astounding conclusions of this program today. And we look forward to you joining us again in the future as events develop.
Thank you very much, and we'd like to thank the audience for all the wonderful comments in the comments section, the links they give us, the information that adds to our story, and of course the donations. So we want to thank everyone and hope to see all of you and hear from all of you, and that you want to hear different topics or you want to add more information to make our program better. But we love all of you and appreciate you, and we're here because of you. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.